I'm on a quest to beat and rate every single PlayStation 2 RPG, TRPG, action RPG, and everything in between. That's over 160 titles. After I beat a game, I'll be making a video where I go through the 10 things I liked and 10 things I did not like in my playthrough. I'll also be giving each game an overall rating and comparing it to the other completed titles. If you want to see my full playthrough, check out my second channel, Low Cloudane Gameplay. Now let's get started.
Low Cloudane.
I'd like to start this video by thanking Patreon Pro member In the Navy for requesting this playthrough and to give him a huge shout out for supporting the channel. Also, I've compiled a document, and if you would like to see which titles I've beaten and my ratings, click on the link in the description below. Shin Megami Tensei is unabashedly a series for hardcore turn-based RPG fanatics, whom I happen to be. Each game only varies in themes and a few gameplay tweaks. Of all the SMT titles I've played, I'd say Digital Devil Saga lands somewhere in the middle. But despite that, the production value and remarkable aging of this title cannot be overlooked. Now, if you would like to skip ahead to a summary of my review, then jump to the time on the screen. For everyone else, let's dive into 10 things I liked and 10 things I did not like about Shin Megami Tensei Digital Devil Saga. Dislike 10. Sarah's Song. Starting off with a doozy here. The melancholic story of DDS1 is probably its most striking initial draw. This is made even more appealing by the protagonist stumbling upon a strange naked girl with powers to control the hunger and rage of the mutated survivors. How does she control them? With a song. Now before I play this, I have to impress upon your mind that this is not a silly game, nor does it take anything light. So imagine a blood-drenched, mature-themed story dropping this number on you.
Cries out to you, deliver us from the dark and give us hope. May you fill us with your undying love, Shanti, Shanti.
My question is, who approved this? This is absolutely cringy and breaks the mood every time it appears. Now you might be thinking, like I did, that perhaps the Japanese version...
Light shines from the heaven, the Asa street light blinks, glory and blaze.
Like 10, the sound design. Now bar Sarah's singing, and honestly her voice actor as well, the voice talent in this title is great. In fact, the entire sound design is great. Heat's angry growls, Gel's monotone murmurings, even Cielo's Jamaican accent is done with such love. The sounds of the monsters screeching, the battle animations, menus, everything has such a satisfying punch to it. I'll talk about the music later in this list, but listen to the sounds of the save room and tell me that isn't some good stuff. Dislike 9. Punishing story decisions and FOMO. Making decisions that affect your playthrough has always been stressful for me. I think there's a fine balance between giving the player freedom to influence the narrative and letting the player everything up. Some good examples would be Final Fantasy VII's side narrative between Aerith and Tifa, or Liza P's lying system. I think both fall on the right side of that balance, making the player feel like no matter which choice they make, they'll be happy with it. DDS1 does not give you that assurance. I remember when the first decision came up on the screen and I thought, what does this do for me? I avoided looking up too much on the topic as I didn't want to ruin anything for the sequel, but yeah. Apparently choices you make in the playthrough of the first title carry over to the second and can decide major points like, will you get a certain party member? Or will you be able to gain the best abilities for your team? To be fair, some of these choices, if the player is paying attention and makes the right choice, can lead to some epic moments. Like, for example, there's a part where you have to choose to trust Heat or not. He's been kind of an asshole so far, so the player's initial reaction is to not trust him. but if you really think about it, this guy has been pretty loyal. If you choose to trust him, you'll be rewarded with an awesome turn of events where he plays both sides to save Sarah. That being said, I do not think all of these choices are as clear as this one, and I found that their presence in the game only produced anxiety for me. Like 9. Reusable items. So here's a feature I don't think I've ran across in any other game. Most items in DDS1 are gone once you use them, but as you progress the story, you'll find reusable items in the store. Not all of these are worth it. For example, you can get an item that can light heal a party member, like a reusable potion, but it can only be used in battle and doesn't heal a lot. But the item that ended up being well worth my time was the Spyglass. This item lets you analyze the enemy, and I used it throughout my entire playthrough. Before I bought it, I was using the Analyze skill, but buying this item freed up an ability slot for something more useful. Dislike 8. Kazuma Kaneko's human designs. Now, before you shut off this video, just know that I love Kazuma Kaneko's artwork, most of the time. I do have to admit though, that his human designs leave something to be desired. I think DDS1 has some of my least favorite human designs in SMT's history. I think that Heat and Gale look great. Some of the other tribe leaders had some interesting designs, but Surf and Sarah, arguably the two most important characters in the game, were just boring. I would have liked to see slightly more of an exaggerated design when it came to these characters. But hey, that's just my thoughts. Kazuma is a master character designer, and though this is a criticism, I still have a ton of respect for the guy. Like 8. Mecha. When building systems within RPGs, I think it's important to make certain aspects be tied to others. For example, in Dark Souls, you collect souls whenever you kill enemies. These points are then used to level up your character, but they're also the currency in the game, which makes you have to manage its usage. Mecha in DDS1 is a similar mechanic. Mecha is the currency in the game, but it is also what is used to unlock mantras for your new skills. This is a smart choice, as unlocking mantra is just as important as stocking up on key items. Making currency affect more than just the shops was a great idea, and made grinding in this game a little more rewarding. Dislike 7. The encounter rate. Alright, so first of all, complaining about having to fight enemies in an RPG is like complaining about having too many tracks in a racing game. Turn-based RPGs are broken up into two parts that almost function as separate games. You have the narrative and the strategic combat. Encounters are simply the point in which the two systems switch from one to the other. With that being said, I do think that there is a balance between the two that is ruptured whenever one mechanic interrupts with pacing of the other. Before I go into encounter rates, let me give you an example of the narrative breaking the pacing of the battles. In DDS1, you first are given the party of Surf, Argala, and Heat. Later, Gale is added to the list of party members. I settled on a main party of Argala and Gale because I felt they balanced out Surf's build really well. But upon entering the ship dungeon, I was locked to a party of Gale and Cielo. This is a time when the narrative interrupted the pace of the battle system because I was building a strategy with one team before the story forced me to use someone else. But that's not my dislike here. The encounter rate in DDS1 is incredibly high and insanely invasive at times. The dungeons in this game are very long and the battles are very involved. This is not a brainless press A battle system. So whenever you are trying to make your way through a dungeon or backtracking because you missed a button you were supposed to push, taking a few steps and getting in a battle only to get into another battle 2 steps after that can be tiresome. I think that in titles where battles can be easily dispatched in a matter of seconds, or games where the enemies are visibly on the field can get away with such high encounter rates. But DDS1's battles are puzzles. You need to figure out enemies' weaknesses and exploit them while trying to avoid being taken out. Some of the hardest fights in this game are normal encounters, and I'm not kidding. Because of this, battles should have rewarded more experience and the encounter rate should have been turned down. This would have easily fixed the balance of DDS1. Like 7. The Devour mechanic. Like I mentioned earlier, you use Mecha or the currency of the game to unlock mantra. Once the mantra is learned by gaining karma in battle, you will unlock a set of abilities. This means that in battle you gain 3 useful currencies: Mecha, experience, and karma. Mecha gain can be accelerated by selling the items you gather out in the field. I never felt that I was snubbed on experience, so I didn't see a reason to increase it. But the mechanic to increase karma gain is quite clever and strategic. In battle, if you exploit an enemy's weakness, you get many benefits. One of these is that you can force the enemy into a state of fear. Once there, a party member can use specific abilities, called Devour abilities. These are high damaging attacks that can only be performed on targets struck with the fear element. If you successfully defeat the enemy, you will devour them and gain a much higher amount of karma than you would normally. This is an excellent way to grind for skills and always feels so satisfying. I also love that it comes with some downsides. When devouring enemies, there is a small chance to be inflicted with the status element Ache, which will stop you from gaining any karma. There is an unlockable mantra containing a skill called Iron Stomach. This will stop you from getting Ache. You can also gain increased karma gain and karma sharing abilities as well. Overall, I'd say this mechanic was highly engaging and gave battles an additional complexity. Dislike 6. Battles with no advantage. You know how they say that our greatest strengths can be our greatest weaknesses? This principle proves true in DDS1. Though the battles in DDS1 are the absolute definitive highlight of this game, there is one absolute major flaw. In a battle system built entirely around exploiting weaknesses, there are just times when you don't really have the needed skills to exploit said weakness. This leads to battles where you're essentially chipping away at the enemy, unable to take part in what makes this game fun. If you're smart with your builds, this shouldn't happen too often. But sometimes there are clusters of enemies that are weak to some ridiculous effects that no sane player would waste an ability slot for. No one is trotting around the nightmare status element in their setup. What I found to be a near perfect counter to this was having at least one physical based party member. Power charge and a physical AoE attack almost always wiped enemy mobs in a 2-turn cycle. Like 6. Heat. The characterization of some characters is done poorly in DDS1. Argala starts out promising. Not sure if she was heading down the lesbian aisle or what with her fixation on Janana.
We can't leave Janana. 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 I can't stop Janana.
I wish I knew how to quit you.
But whatever was going on got completely abandoned shortly after that section of the game. Gale has some promise for the sequel. It's implied that he's somehow different than the others, and that makes him intriguing, though it did not amount to a character arc. Cielo is pretty much the same from beginning to end. The only character who had an arc to speak of was Heat. Not just that, but he's the most expressive character among literal blocks of wood. I enjoyed his story, and I think that the writers handled him pretty well. He's fixated on Sarah throughout, and you're not entirely sure what his intentions are until later in the story. He ends up forcing Sarah to kiss him and forget her feelings for Surf. This leads to a subtle moment for his character that doesn't overstay its welcome. Altogether, I'd argue that Heat is the best character story-wise in the game. Dislike 5. Coordinate 136. Okay, where do I start here? Well, the dungeons in DDS1 are adequate. World design was not a top priority here, and empty, lonely mazes and hallways support this. Visually, this game isn't all that interesting. I think it was an intentional decision, as this is a depressive post-apocalyptic world. But I don't know, other games like Last of Us, Chrono Trigger, or Borderlands did this much better. Anyway, because of this lackluster design, most dungeons, to put it bluntly, are boring. But you know what's worse than boring? Tedious puzzles. Coordinate 136 is a castle with a strange fairy tale theme where you follow the story of a princess and her prince. Most puzzles have you doing some form of reuniting statues or moving mirrors. I think the mirror puzzles worked, mainly because there were no random battles in this area and you didn't get sent off to some random ass hallway for making a mistake. Everything else though is just mind-numbingly tedious. I gotta be honest, the game almost lost me here. The funny part is that some of this dungeon is just recycled from the previous one. If these paintings see you, they drop you into a maze just like the statues in the previous dungeon. If there is a low point in DDS1, it was Coordinate 136. Luckily, the boss fight and side quest where you fight King Jack is fun, which makes up for the grind. Like 5. The Moldahara theme. Shoji Meguro is an absolute legend, and his musical range is truly impressive. But after playing DDS1, I'm convinced that his true calling was composing the blues. The soundtrack of DDS1 is so bluesy that half the time I felt I was in a dark, smoky club watching someone wail on the saxophone. If I had to pick one piece to exemplify his mastery, I'd say that it's one of my new favorite VGMs, the theme of Moldahara. Take a listen. This is fantastic. I would often visit this area just to sit and jam. What a solid piece of music. I can't even imagine what this would sound like with a live band playing it. I'll say it once more, Shoji Meguro is an absolute legend. Dislike 4, the human form mechanic. After the opening events of DDS1, every party member has the ability to transform into a demon. This is the default state of your party during battles, and you will always want to be in this form. But the game gives you the option to revert back to your human form and use guns. Sometimes you'll start the battle as humans and will need to transform. It's kind of this title's surprise attack on the party. The differences between the forms, at least that I can tell, is that you lose access to your abilities but can use the gun you've equipped to your party member. There is really only one advantage to the human form. Again, as far as I can tell. It's that certain enemies are weak to gun damage. Let me state this for anyone wondering. That is absolutely not worth it. To transform or revert back costs you a turn, and in the time it takes to set up your attack, you will probably be able to beat the enemies with normal strikes. This mechanic is so worthless that whenever I got in a surprise battle, I'd just run. They weren't worth the time. The only time I felt this mechanic was handled correctly was the late game ability some enemies have to force transformations. This was an effective status ailment that forced me to change strategy mid-battle, and that's a good thing, but that's only in the final dungeon and final boss. Aside from that, there is almost no reason to have included the human form mechanic aside from being consistent with the narrative. Like 4, Kazuma Kaneko's demon designs. For all the crap I gave the human designs in this game, it's important to let everyone know that where the human designs failed, the demon ones more than made up for it. These are incredibly unique. Surf's form has an almost shark-like design with his hands and forearms splitting open to release sinuous blades. Gale's head splits open down the middle, revealing his gaping mouth. He also has sheathed spikes jutting out of his calves. The best of all the designs is Argala. This was a risky design for sure. Her mouths are her breasts, and she talks with them, pulls items from them, and they quake whenever she's been hurt. The design team had to have at least paused when they saw these initial drawings, but man does it work here. Her arms also extend like whips, which is so badass. Cielo and Heat's demon forms get the shorter end of the stick. Heat's is kind of boring, all things considered. He has 2 heads and short blades coming from his hands. Cielo can fly, I guess. This guy just kind of sucks all around, both in gameplay and design. All that said though, the demon designs, even the worst of them, stand as pinnacles of SMT design in my opinion. Dislike 3, hard or unfair? Alright, here's a point that I'm hesitant to bring up. Most SMT fans would unsubscribe from the mere thought of this. But are the SMT games hard, or are they just unfair sometimes? Take this battle for instance. The enemy got the first turn and used it to put my party to sleep before casting a spell that kills anyone afflicted with the sleep status. This wiped my party out without me even making a single choice. Now I hear you, I know what you're thinking. Yeah, but there's an ability that makes you invulnerable to sleep, and if you had focused on your speed stat, you would have gotten first turn. Right? Something like that? I really do hear you. But aside from the final boss, this is the only time in the entire game that I was put to sleep. That doesn't warrant an entire skill slot. Also, how much speed is enough in this game? What if I had spent most of my points in speed and lacked any damage capabilities? No, my friends, I'm going to argue that this battle wasn't hard, it was unfair. Now, DDS1 isn't the only game to mix up difficulty with unfairness. The Capra Demon in Dark Souls is the most unfair bullshit boss in the history of gaming. And I still like that game. But sometimes it's important to call a spade a spade. Like 3, battle pace. Like I said in my opening, SMT is all about the turn-based battles, and after dozens of games, they know their stuff. One of the most important things that SMT and DDS1 do that all other turn-based battle systems can learn from is being able to select your attacks as battle animations are being performed. In speedrunning, every second counts, which is why a skip that can win you a few seconds is worth hours of practice. Turn-based battles are the same. Every second counts. No one likes battle systems that make you feel like you're wasting your time. DDS1's battle pace is honestly phenomenal. Battles are snappy and have a satisfying flow that never feels stilted or needlessly dragged out. And this is important as, again, the main reason you play an SMT game isn't for the story, or the dialogue, or even the world design. It's for the top tier turn-based battles. Dislike 2, bland world and dungeons. I feel like I covered most of this talking about Coordinate 136. Look, I'm not a game designer. Building worlds is difficult, especially in 3D using the PS2 engine. But man, something is just missing here. As you play, you feel as though the designers did the bare minimum when it came to world design. The final dungeon and tower, here we go, Chandler just bitching about final dungeons. Anyway, the final tower climb is just the same white corridors over and over again. The only two areas that felt aesthetically pleasing were the temple, which is pretty much just one room, and the sewer dungeon. But yeah, whatever. Like 2, mantras and custom builds. I've said it once and I'll say it again. Choice is so incredibly important when it comes to RPGs. Mantras are nodes that a character can unlock. Each node contains a set amount of abilities, and each node follows a specific branch. These branches include the 6 elements: debuffing, buffing, healing, physical, and hunt builds. From the get-go, a character can learn any ability as long as you have the Maka to unlock it and the Karma to learn the skills. This means that every party member is customizable. Now, you also get to distribute stats in this game, but it is exclusive to Surf. All other party members have a set stat path, meaning that there are intended builds. Heat is a physical attacker, Argala is your DPS mage and healer, Gale is the most balanced stat-wise, and Cielo, well, Cielo sucks. So Surf's build should be dependent on your chosen party. I made Surf a straight up physical attacker, loading him up with passive counter abilities and single target or AoE physical damaging attacks. This did not pay off immediately. In fact, halfway through the game I thought I had made a huge mistake. But towards the end game, magic damage became less effective, where physical damage gave me an almost guaranteed 2-turn wipe for most mob battles. My only criticism of the stat allocation is that you are 100% in charge of Surf's growth. If you don't give him any speed, then he will have no speed. I think stat allocation is best if partially automated. Monochrome Mobius does this well. Your characters get their regular growths, but you get a certain amount of points that you can dish out if you want to swing them in a direction different from the neutral one. But I'd rather have full control than none. My endgame team and builds ended up being Argala as a mage with a wide range of elemental magical damage spells, and Gale acting almost exclusively as a support, buffing my party, debuffing, and healing my team. This was by far the most satisfying part of this game, and seeing my choices made in the early game come to fruition in the late game was so satisfying. In a second playthrough, the only thing I would change is that I'd have split the elements between Argala and Gel, and had them both have buffing abilities so I could reach upper damage quicker. Dislike 1, the silent hero. DDS1 desperately needed a protagonist to anchor its story. Surf should never have been a silent protagonist. There was just no reason for it. I can't think of a worse example of a game needing a voiced hero with a personality than this. Perhaps Golden Sun, but even then, Isaac and Felix are at least voiced in their accompanying titles. Surf's silence was terrible. Heat, Cielo, Argala, and Gale are the axis that drive the narrative forward. And like I mentioned, the only one who does this fairly well is Heat. Surf's silence especially hurts your experience when it comes to his and Sarah's relationship. One of my favorite moments in Kingdom Hearts is at the end of the first title when Sora and Kairi are split up and have to say goodbye.
I know you will!
What an emotional scene. Now imagine the impact of this scene if Sora had been a silent, indistinct blob for the entirety of the game. the emotional weight of this moment would have been entirely different. DDS1 tries to pull this off in its climax, and it absolutely fails. I think I yawned during this scene. I didn't care about Surf. Hell, I don't even know why Sarah likes him. They didn't develop a relationship, or at least there wasn't a scene that they did. If Heat had been the main protagonist of this game, I think the story, in its entirety, would have been better. Like 1. Exploiting weaknesses and gaining an extra turn. My main goal in every battle of DDS1 was to see if I could finish off the enemy before I ran out of turns. This drove me to memorize enemy weaknesses. Whenever I stepped into a new area, I analyzed each enemy and drove to memory their weakness. These insanely ugly one-eyed guys, they're weak to fire and earth. Ice Jacks, fire. Pyrojacks, ice. These guys, dispel. Now that I think about it, this is the only title ever that I've used some sort of scan or analyze ability, because it's the only game I can remember where hitting an enemy weakness was worth losing out on a turn of damage. That has to be a sign of a great battle system. Shin Megami Tensei Digital Devil Saga is a game made for turn-based enthusiasts. This is not a casual RPG, and I would not recommend it for anyone other than a dedicated veteran. The story, world design, and character design are all subpar and lack identity, but the battle system, character builds, and most importantly, the demon designs are some of the best the SMT series has to offer. And that's good because with such an insane encounter rate, you'll be spending 80% of your playthrough engaging in just that. As for my personal opinion, I like it. Funny enough though, I did not love it. I had some hard criticisms for Radiata stories, but I think that's because I really enjoyed that game and wanted to live up to my expectations. I had less harsh criticisms for DDS1, but found myself liking it less than Radiata stories. So I guess there's that. Anyway, that's my review. Thank you to all my Patreon members, and if you would like to request your own list, join the Pro tier for only $5 a month. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and hey, if you want to follow along with my current playthroughs, be sure to subscribe to Low Cloud and Gameplay. Bye!